There is a clock ticking underneath the floorboards of Western civilization. You can't see it, and you can't hear it. But if you look at the history of the last 3,000 years, you can set your watch by it. In 1976, a British general named Sir John Glubb sat down in his study to answer a question that had haunted him his entire life. He was a man who had spent decades in the Middle East, watching cultures rise and fall, and he wanted to understand the mechanism behind it. He studied the lifespan of 11 separate empires, spanning from the Assyrians in 859 BC to the British Empire in 1950. These were distinct cultures with different gods, different technologies, different climates, and different languages. Yet, when he laid their timelines side by side, he found something that shouldn't be possible. They all lasted the exact same amount of time. 10 generations, roughly 250 years. It didn't matter if they had horses or steam engines. It didn't matter if they were a democracy or a dictatorship. They all followed the exact same biological life cycle. They were born in violence. They grew in commerce. They peaked in affluence. And they died in decadence. Glubb realized that empires are not static structures. They are organisms. And like all organisms, they have a lifespan. The United States of America was founded in 1776. If you do the math, 1776 plus 250 years puts the expiration date of the American experiment right around 2026. Does that sound crazy? Look around you, the polarization, the debt, the inflation, the loss of purpose. You feel it, don't you? That feeling that something fundamental has broken? That isn't random chaos. That is the alarm bell of the 250-year clock ringing in your ears. But Glubb discovered something else. He found that the death of an empire isn't just about culture, it's about mechanism. There is a specific trigger, a financial suicide pill, that every dying empire swallows in its final years. To understand why we are crashing, and specifically where we are on the timeline right now, you have to understand the 7 stages of empire. This isn't a vague theory, it is a documented historical sequence that has destroyed every major power across 2 millennia. Stage 1 is the age of pioneers. This is the outburst. It's a group of people with nothing to lose and everything to gain. They are tough, disciplined, and unified. They have no money, but they have enormous purpose. Think of the American settlers pushing west, or the early Roman legions marching into Gaul. They possess a shared stoicism and a willingness to sacrifice the present for the future. In this stage, the money is sound. It is hard. It is gold and silver, earned through sweat and blood. There is no debt, only equity. Stage 2 is the age of conquests and expansion. Because the pioneers are disciplined, they create safety. Because they create safety, they attract commerce. The empire expands its borders and builds its infrastructure. This is the era of public works. Rome built its aqueducts and roads. America built the Hoover Dam and the interstate highway system. The society is building the foundation of its wealth, and the currency remains stable because it is backed by the productive capacity of the nation. Stage 3 is the age of commerce and affluence. This is the peak. The hard work of the previous generations pays off. The standard of living explodes. The empire dominates global trade. It feels invincible. But this affluence brings a hidden curse. The struggle for survival is forgotten. The virtues that built the empire, thrift, duty, sacrifice, begin to look old-fashioned. They are replaced by the desire for comfort and status. The merchant replaces the soldier as the cultural hero. We stop producing things and start trading things. Stage 4 is the turning point, the age of overextension. This is where the math begins to break. The empire is now rich, but it is also expensive. It has military bases all over the world to protect its trade. It has a massive government bureaucracy. It has promises to keep to its citizens in the form of welfare and social programs. Suddenly, the costs of maintaining the empire exceed the income of the empire. This is the most critical moment in the life of a civilization. The government faces a binary choice. Do they cut spending, retreat from the world, and live within their means? Or do they try to maintain the illusion of power by spending money they don't have? They always choose the illusion. This decision triggers the death spiral. Stage 5 is the age of debasement. To pay for the wars and the welfare without raising taxes, the government separates its currency from reality. In the ancient world, they mixed copper into the gold. In the modern world, we print paper and click buttons. Let's look at the first true superpower, Rome. The Roman Empire was built on the back of the denarius. It was a silver coin, nearly 100% pure. It was trust, forged in metal. But by 64 AD, the Emperor Nero had a problem. He wanted to rebuild Rome after the Great Fire, he wanted to hold games to distract the populace, and he had to pay the legions. But the treasury was empty. So Nero did something that no emperor had done before. He melted down the silver coins and mixed in 10% copper. He lowered the purity to 90%. To the average citizen, the coin looked the same, but Nero had just magically created 10% more money to pay his bills. It felt like free money, but it was the beginning of the end. Once you start stealing purchasing power, you can't stop. Later emperors followed Nero's lead. By the year 200 AD, the coin was only 50% silver. By 270 AD, under the crisis of the 3rd century, the silver coin was merely a bronze slug dipped in a thin wash of silver, 0.02% purity. Historians tell us that the silver wash would eventually rub off on people's fingers, staining their hands and revealing the rotten copper underneath. A perfect metaphor for the empire itself. The result was a doom loop. The military demanded higher wages because the coins were worthless, so the government printed more bad coins to pay them. Now, look at the United States. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard. He turned the dollar from a receipt for gold into a fiat currency backed by nothing but promises. This was the modern equivalent of Nero's debasement. Since that day, the US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power against gold. In 1971, an ounce of gold cost $35. Today, in late 2025, that same ounce approaches $3,600. The gold didn't change. It's the same metal sitting in a vault. What changed is the paper in your pocket. It is melting away, just like the silver wash on a Roman coin. Stage 6 is the age of decline and loss of confidence. This is the stage where the consequences of debasement become undeniable. It is characterized by a specific mathematical milestone, the point where the debt consumes the empire. In 2024, for the first time in United States history, the government spent more on interest payments on the national debt than it spent on national defense. Let that sink in. We are now spending $882 billion just to service the debt of the past, while spending only $874 billion to secure our future. We are paying more to bondholders than we are to the soldiers, sailors, and airmen combined. This is the terminal signal. We can no longer afford our own dominance. The only way to pay that interest is to print more money. But printing more money creates more inflation, which drives up interest rates, which creates more interest payments. We are in the debt spiral, and the world is watching. Stage 6 is when international partners realize the empire is insolvent. This leads to the loss of reserve currency status. We have seen this movie before. Before the dollar, there was the British pound. Before the pound, there was the Dutch guilder. In the 17th century, the Dutch guilder was the world reserve currency. Amsterdam was the center of global finance. But the Dutch overextended themselves. They fought too many wars, against England, against France. To fund these wars, they printed money and took on massive debt. Slowly, the world lost confidence. Merchants started preferring the British pound. The shift didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it was irreversible. By the 1780s, the guilder collapsed and the British pound took the throne. Then, Britain repeated the cycle. In 1931, Britain was the center of the financial world. The pound sterling was as good as gold. But the cost of World War I and an expanding welfare state had drained the treasury. The government was broke, but they refused to admit it. Then came the breaking point. It didn't start in a bank, it started on a ship. In September 1931, at a cold port in Scotland called Invergordon, the sailors of the British Atlantic Fleet discovered that the government was planning to cut their pay by up to 25% to balance the budget. These were the men protecting the empire, and they were being asked to pay for the politicians' mistakes. They mutinied. For 2 days, the greatest navy in the world refused orders. When news of the Invergordon mutiny hit the wires, panic swept the globe. International investors realized that if Britain couldn't even pay its sailors, the game was over. They began to sell pounds and demand gold. The run on the Bank of England was ferocious. On September 21st, 1931, Britain suspended the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value almost overnight. The empire that had ruled the waves for centuries was financially broken, and within a generation, it was gone. We are seeing the same cracks in the American foundation today. For 50 years, the US dollar was protected by the petrodollar arrangement, a deal where Saudi Arabia sold oil exclusively in dollars. This forced every country on earth to hold dollars to buy energy. It was the anchor of American hegemony. But in 2024 and 2025, that foundation cracked. We are seeing the rise of a new financial architecture designed to bypass the dollar completely. Have you heard of Project Enbridge? You probably haven't, because the media doesn't talk about it. It is a digital platform developed by the central banks of China, Thailand, the UAE, and Hong Kong. It allows them to trade directly with each other using digital currencies, completely ignoring the US banking system. This isn't a theory. It reached the minimum viable product stage in mid-2024. Real money is moving through it right now. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now members like Iran and the UAE, are aggressively buying gold. They aren't trying to destroy the dollar, they are just building a life raft because they see our ship sinking. They see the 250-year clock ticking down. They know that when the US government has to choose between defaulting on its $36 trillion debt or printing the dollar into oblivion, politicians will always choose the printer. This brings us to stage 7, the collapse. This is the return to reality. The currency fails, the social order fractures. The empire either disintegrates or is absorbed by a younger, stronger power. What does stage 7 look like? We have a terrifying example from history that shows us the speed at which this happens. We often think of the Weimar Republic in Germany as a chaotic mess, but we forget that prior to 1923, Germany was the pinnacle of Western civilization. It was the land of Beethoven, Einstein, and heavy industry. It had the best universities and the best engineers. If it could happen there, it can happen anywhere. Burdened by war debts they couldn't pay and the French occupation of their industrial heartland, the German government made the fatal decision to print money to pay workers to stay home and strike. This was the passive resistance. They were paying people to produce nothing, using money that was backed by nothing. At first, it created a boom. Stocks went up, wages went up. It was what economists call the crack-up boom. People felt rich because they had more paper in their pockets. But the mathematics of exponential decay are ruthless. There is a famous account from a student in 1923. He walked into a cafe and ordered a cup of coffee. The price on the menu was 5,000 marks. By the time he finished drinking it, the waiter dropped a bill on his table for 8,000 marks. Think about that. In the 20 minutes it took to drink a coffee, the currency had lost nearly 40% of its value. You've heard the stories of wheelbarrows, workers getting paid twice a day so they could rush to the store before prices rose. But there is one story that captures the madness perfectly. A man brought a wheelbarrow full of cash to the bakery to buy bread. He left it outside for a moment to check the line. When he came back, he found the money dumped on the street and the wheelbarrow stolen. The wood of the wheelbarrow had utility. The paper was a lie. The lesson of Weimar and Rome and Britain is that confidence is binary. It works until it doesn't. You can debase a currency for decades, like Rome did, like we are doing, but when the public realizes the game is rigged, the shift to stage 7 doesn't take years, it takes months. So why don't we see it coming? Why are we sitting here in late 2025, acting as if everything is fine? There is a psychological flaw in the human brain called normalcy bias. It is the refusal to believe that a disaster will occur even when the evidence is staring you in the face. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, many passengers refused to get into the lifeboats because the deck of the ship still felt safer than the dark ocean. They couldn't comprehend that the unsinkable ship was sinking. We are suffering from collective normalcy bias. We look at the stock market hitting all-time highs and think it means the economy is strong. We don't realize that the stock market is just the deck of the Titanic rising into the air before the final plunge. The money illusion blinds us. In the final stages of an empire, the standard of living can remain high while wealth evaporates. We have cheap consumer goods, the bread and circuses, but real assets are becoming impossible to own. Think about the wheelbarrow story from Weimar. Today, we don't have wheelbarrows of cash. We have digital wheelbarrows. When a mediocre house in the suburbs costs $1 million, that's not the house becoming more valuable. That is the wheelbarrow getting full. When the S&P 500 hits record highs while the real economy slows down, that isn't growth. That is the currency losing its value relative to productive assets. When Bitcoin hits $100,000, that isn't just crypto innovation. That is the market screaming that the dollar is leaking energy. The middle class is being wiped out not because they lack salaries, but because the cost of entry to the asset class is moving away from them faster than they can save. This is the ultimate symptom of stage 6, a society of renters entertained by screens, owning nothing, while the currency slowly dies. We are eating our seed corn. We are borrowing from our grandchildren to pay for our comfort today. And the wealth transfer that is coming will be the largest in human history. You have to understand how inflation works. It is a tax, but it is not a tax on everyone equally. It is a tax on the past to fund the present. If you worked for 40 years and saved your money in the bank, inflation steals those 40 years of labor. It transfers the value of your work to the government, which gets to pay off its massive debts with cheaper, debased money. This is why the rich get richer during these periods. They don't hold currency. They hold assets. They hold debt. If you borrow $10 million to buy an apartment building and inflation destroys the currency, the debt becomes easy to pay off, but the building retains its value. The debtor wins. The saver loses. The pioneer mindset is punished and the decadent mindset is rewarded. Until the crash. So the clock is ticking. 2026 is approaching. The debt is compounding. The 7 stages are almost complete. What do? Most people will do nothing. They will succumb to normalcy bias. They will trust the system until the ATM stops working. They will wait for the government to save them, not realizing that the government is the one causing the problem. They are the victims of history, but you don't have to be. History shows that when an empire's currency fails, wealth doesn't vanish. It transfers. It transfers from those who hold paper to those who hold real things. Gold, silver, land, hard assets, productive businesses. You need to step out of the age of decadence and reclaim the mindset of the pioneer. A pioneer prepares. A pioneer takes responsibility. A pioneer doesn't rely on the government to save them. The 250-year cycle isn't a death sentence. It's a changing of the seasons. Winter is coming for the US dollar. But for those who are prepared, winter is the best time to buy. The snow clears out the rot. It clears out the zombie companies, the malinvestment, and the frivolity. Don't let your labor be stolen by the inflation tax. Don't let your legacy be washed away like the silver on a Roman coin. Don't be the man with the stolen wheelbarrow, wondering where his value went. If you want to survive the reset, you need to be outside the blast radius of the dollar. You need to hold assets that have no counterparty risk. Assets that don't rely on a politician's promise or a central banker's algorithm. If this video gave you a new perspective on history, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are tracking the collapse pattern in real time, and we want you on the right side of the trade. The clock is ticking. The alarm is ringing. Make sure you're holding something real when it strikes 12.